Hi, everybody, and welcome to the NDSC podcast, a place where management faculty and PhD students share about their journeys and stories in academia. Before we start with our next episode, I want to give a huge thanks to our sponsor for this episode, EGADE and Tecnológico de Monterrey. They supported a lot of the NDSC objectives this year, right? And provided with help and support, right? So thank you a lot to EGADE and Tecnológico Monterrey. I'm gonna share a link to their website, right? They're a school in Monterrey, but they're also all over Mexico. They do work globally, especially in Latin America, right? So they're kind of like one of the leaders in education in Latin America, one of the top business schools in the region for sure, and we really appreciate having them as our partners and one of our sponsors this year. Thank you very much to EGADE and Tecnológico de Monterrey. Hi everybody, welcome to these special sessions. We're recording here live at AOM in Boston. So now this time I have Michaela with me, also team member of the NDSC committee, and with us our guest Jeff Gish from University of Central Florida. Jeff, thanks for being with us. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So something that I like to start always with is kind of like a little icebreaker. Instead of going directly into asking you about your career, academics, research, let's know more about you as a person, right? What's maybe a passion of you, a hobby, something that you do outside of the university, or anything that has to do with academics?
Outside of anything that has to do with academics?
Yes, outside of it.
Well, I do work a lot. But I also have a family. I have a wife and 3 kids, and I like spending time with them. And so I spend a lot of time with my family. We like to go, we live in Florida. We're pretty close to the beach. We go to the beach. I ride mountain bikes with my son. And there aren't many mountains in Florida, but there are places to ride mountain bikes. And so we found those. And it's one of the main ways that I get exercise now is getting out and pedaling on a bike. And it's also good because I have some projects on spending time in nature and how that's good for mental well-being. And it makes me a better husband, a better father, I think, and also a better worker.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that there's a lot of mountain biking in Florida, but you somehow found the way to do it. That's
yeah. Yeah. You just have to pedal for all your speed. There's no downhill riding.
Yeah. Perfect. So the first question, and then I'll let Michaela take the mic. Tell us a little bit of how you got into this career, and then also maybe a little bit of your process on which program, right, and kind of like that path and decision, and maybe why you focused on entrepreneurship stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, okay, so it's a little bit of a long story, mine, because I didn't take a clean path directly from undergrad or a master's program to a PhD. I actually started out as a high school teacher, and I taught social science, so civics, economics, history, and I enjoyed that. I was going to be a basketball coach and teach social studies, and I did that for a few years, but my wife and I had a kid, and it kind of just changed our whole life path. And so I went back to school and got a master's degree, and I was looking at the job market at the end of that program, and I didn't want to leave where we lived at the time, and I was going to have to leave to a bigger market to get a job with this MBA. And so I decided I would investigate starting my own business, and I did. I had a business for 7 years, from 2006 to 2013, and when I sold that business to a larger competitor, I was thinking about what's next? What's my next step? And I was confused about how I could treat a couple different employees totally the same. And one would be a very loyal employee and a great worker, and the other would steal from me, for example. This happened. And I wanted to kind of find out, why is it that people react so differently to management styles or company culture? And I started reading some papers and in some of our academic journals that everyone knows and loves now, but maybe didn't know so much before you joined a PhD program. And I found out that you can actually do this research, and that can be a career. I had no idea. But I met up with some people from my master's program and asked them some questions about how they ended up getting their positions and getting their PhDs. we started talking some more about my research interests, and now I do work on individual level entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurs make decisions, and sometimes new venture employees. So I've stayed pretty true to my initial interest in research, but of course you meet new people and you start thinking about new ideas, and they've branched in many different directions, and I've met a lot of interesting people in the academy. So that's how I got into it, and I started applying to programs, and I didn't know what I didn't know. When I was applying to PhD programs, I was just thinking, oh, well, I have a master's degree. Do I have to take coursework? Yeah, you have to take coursework. It's very different than a master's program. And I learned a lot about writing, had a great advisor, Dave Wagner at University of Oregon, and he's also a good mentor. We stay in touch to this day. And they had an entrepreneurship program there, and I thought I'd apply at Oregon, and the rest is history. And now my rookie placement out of my PhD program was the University of Central Florida in Orlando, which took me out of the Northwest, but my family that still lives in the Northwest will come visit us in Orlando to come see the theme parks or the beach.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, that's actually really interesting. But what do you find to be like the most fulfilling thing about being an academic?
Fulfilling. Well, one thing just sort of off the cuff that I enjoy about being an academic is, and compared to my small business career, I had 57 employees and 42 trucks driving across the country, and with that many things going on, it's very likely that each day there's going to be some type of emergency, and it's probably not going to be during working hours, or many times it's not during working hours. And so what I like about being a professor now, a junior faculty member at UCF, is that there really aren't any emergencies. The research cycle is lumpy. You might have a really busy cycle and you have to really buckle down and work long hours, and I'm fine with that. But if I don't write this paragraph today, it can obviously get written tomorrow, and there are times where I just need a break, and that's possible. There's a lot of autonomy with a career as a professor, and so that's one of the things that I really do appreciate.
Like in contrast to that, what would you say is the most challenging thing about the position that you have now?
Challenging. Oh, have you submitted a paper before and received reviewer feedback? Because that's challenging. And I started doing that in grad school. Had no idea. We can grow our research pipeline as we become better researchers, right? And so I have more things going on now. And I teach more classes than I did when I was a graduate student. And somehow you just adjust to that, but the rejection never gets fun. And I've had some success publishing, but I've also had a lot of rejections. And, you also get better at research as you go through this career, and hopefully that means that you get fewer rejections. And the process can feel a little bit random as far as which reviewers you get, or, which reviewers were available at the time for the editor that's handling your paper. And that's a frustration. I don't think that's a unique frustration to me. I think if you asked 100 research active faculty that question, that would be at least on their list of frustrations that they have. But I also review for journals, and that helps me see what other reviewers are seeing about papers when I look at the overall feedback and what the editor decided to use to make his or her decision. And that's valuable feedback for me. It's not just to see if I was off kilter with my review, but also to become a better researcher myself. So I would say the review process is the most infuriating process. It's also rewarding because there are some times where the review process makes papers better. And I found that if you have good editorial leadership on this paper, who is thinking about things that you haven't thought of before with the reviewers and sees a future for the paper, that can be a really generative process. And even though it's a lot of work and it's multiple rounds, it's a better product at the end, and that's something that I'm thankful for. So the review process is a blessing, but mostly a curse for me when I get rejected.
Yes.
Oh man, yeah. I haven't gotten to experience that yet, but I'm looking forward to that when it comes.
Getting rejected?
No, not getting rejected, but
the
just
blessing part.
The good part of it.
The generative part of the process.
All right, so what would you say is the best advice you've received so far?
Yeah. Best advice. Well, it probably happens right after a rejection when I'm, a mentor or a friend is talking me back from the ledge of a building that I want to jump off of, or a cliff that I might be peering over and questioning my life decisions. Figuratively, of course. And when they give me advice, they try and conceptualize, or I guess get me to see things in a more positive light. I mean, when you do get feedback from a journal, it can still make the paper better, even if it's with a rejection. And so once I take what I would call affective tone away from the feedback, so the thoughts and feelings that are the feelings and moods that are developed from that adverse feedback or critical feedback, and I can separate my emotions from the stuff that really is a valid critique, then I can actually make the paper better. And that usually takes time. It takes advice. And I think that's good advice that I've received from other people who are research active and people who are much more accomplished than I am. And so just hearing from them, commiserating with them that, I get rejected too. Because you see these polished papers and you think, this is how these are written first draft. Because that was my experience with writing leading up to a PhD program. I maybe wrote a rough draft, got some feedback on that, wrote a final draft, turned it in, get a grade, usually a good grade, and then I'm done with that piece of writing. But that's not the type of writing that we do with a PhD. In a research career, if you're going to continue writing, is an iterative process, and it takes more iterations than I ever imagined. I mean, I've written introductions you're essentially selling the paper in the introduction, right? And I've written introductions 20 times before ever submitting a paper. And that can be infuriating, but it's also how papers begin to look so polished when they are published.
I think I want to take a little bit of time to kind of highlight that you said, because I think when you're a PhD student or looking into going to a PhD student, you start reading papers, right? Something that you're not used to unless you're kind of in this world. You see these papers, right? These AMJs, and oh my God, how can I? But as you said, right, these go through a lot of process. First with the authors, right? And there's drafts and revisions. Then you get a friendly review, or your advisor revise it, and then you got that. Then you submit it to a journal, and there are revision process there. So the final product is just a lot of revisions and polishing and a lot of work, right? It's not you see it one day, you write it, and that's it, right? So, and I think, maybe it was only me, but you read those papers and you're expecting that this is what I need to submit, right? And no, that is the end submission after a long time of work. So I think that's a great idea to highlight. I know for anybody that's an early PhD, I think it's important to understand that what we see out there it's like when you're watching a movie, right? There was a lot of editing behind it to what you watch in the movie theater, right? So
and I think a lot it takes.
Yeah, exactly. So another question that we like to ask is, maybe what's a resource, right, that during your PhD or now in your career as an academic has been super helpful and you think it can be helpful for others?
Yeah, I will answer that question in a moment, but I want to go back to your thought that the papers look so polished, and maybe I actually had a different view. When I started talking to people from my MBA program who were professors, they handed me some AMJs to read, and I read them, and I'm like, well, I think I could do that. And so I was overly optimistic.
A good trait of an entrepreneur.
I suppose, yeah. Or it can be a damning trait too. But you do have to be an eternal optimist to continue submitting papers, especially after a string of rejections. But I think I might have been overly optimistic. But of course, you learn, right? We the more we learn, the less we feel like we know, and that's very true for me too. So once I got into the process and started writing and revising, and it's very hard for me to revise my own writing. I don't know if you guys struggle with that, but that's something that I struggle with immensely, because I feel like, well, I've already said it. Can somebody else give me suggestions on how to fix it? Yeah. But I become better at that through just working at it, and it's hard for me. I don't think I'm a natural writer that can just sit down and make prose. I really think deeply about things before I write them, and it's hard for me to update that thinking when it's my own words on the page. And so that's something that I've struggled with, but gotten better with experience.
Awesome.
And then you asked me about a resource that has helped me, and when I think about resources or research that's been put out there on the process of writing, and perhaps how there's randomness in the review process, because I don't think anybody would argue that the review process is perfect. but it's the best way to achieve a peer-reviewed and edited piece of work at the end of that process. And so, first of all, you don't want to just feel defeated because you've been rejected. You want to try and give it some time, separate yourself from the emotions and that it elicited when you first read it. But there's a paper out there that was my favorite paper to read in graduate school. And the paper, if you want to look it up, I highly recommend it. I talked to my wife right after I read it, and I said, why can't all papers in management be like this? It's about the work that we do. And the paper reference is Hollenbeck and Manor. It's 2007. It's published in the Journal of Organizational Behavior. And it talks about how the research submission and peer review process can be random. However, if you control the things that you can, then you can have success as a researcher. What's called your true score, your ability as a researcher, will be revealed. And so they go through, I believe they do a simulation, and they also look at the careers of people who have tried to submit papers. And I mean, if you want to get into the weeds to find out how likely it is that your true score comes out, I highly recommend the paper. But it's also enlightening because it talks about what you can control. So those two things that it talks about you can control are your activity level, how much you continue writing, and your level of resilience. How much do you keep going when a paper is rejected? So do you submit it to one journal and it gets rejected and you quit that paper? That would be a low resilience score. But if you submit to several different journals, 2 or 3, that's a little bit higher, and then even more than that, it's even more resilient. So that's how they measure resilience. Activity level is just, how much time do you spend writing? And of course, this is for doctoral students, and so as you're learning to write, your researcher true score, your ability to be a researcher is improving, but that's just a result of the work that you're doing in your training. The two things that you can control that whole time is how resilient you are to critical feedback and how much activity you do. And that's terribly freeing to me because I can control those things. I don't get to control who the chief editor gives my paper to handle. I don't get to control who the associate editor is and which reviewers they send it to. And I will never know who those people are if the blind review process works. And so I don't get to control that, but I can control what I write, how I react to the comments, and I can keep my activity level up and stay resilient. And so that was just, it's a paper that makes me smile every time I read it. And I love recommending it to doctoral students because of the effect that it had on me.
That's awesome. What I'll do is at the bottom of the link, I'll add of these podcasts, I'll add the link to that paper because I think that's awesome. I'll read it too. So the last question that we like to do is usually tailored to the interviewee. So I wanted to ask, and we talked a little bit about this before we started, but I changed it a little bit. We share a similar background, right? I was an entrepreneur, you were an entrepreneur. So what from your entrepreneurship experience do you think that it's kind of like the skills that transfer and help you really well here as an academic, right? So I'm thinking more like now your experience as an entrepreneur, how that really helped you or has helped you maybe.
Well, we did talk about over-optimism and how that can be perhaps, a benefit that because all the journals that we submit to are increasingly hard to get into, and it's hard to publish high-quality research because there's just a lot of people trying to do it, and there are only certain spots left. There are only a certain number of papers that come out in a journal per year. So being optimistic has helped me continue in the face of really challenging odds of publishing a paper. I also try and make sure I'm doing the most rigorous work that I can in order to be able to at least get some traction at the journal and then learn how to become a better researcher myself, because I don't think that ever stops. But as far as what helps me as an entrepreneur, the optimism, being an eternal optimist probably helps stay resilient, helps me fall back in love with a paper that's been rejected and keep pushing it forward. But I think also the level of persistence that I have to have. There were a lot of challenging things that happened when I was in business, and I thought, well, it's either figure out how to overcome this challenge, or you may not have a business in a few months if you become insolvent. And so I approach a lot of research projects that way. I approach teaching a new prep when I'm teaching a new prep for coursework. I approach those things as challenges as opposed to hindrances. And yes, they create stress, but when I frame that stress as a challenge to be overcome, I think I can do. It gives me a lot better frame to approach the problem, and I think it's a lot more likely that I stick in this career that is filled with challenging times, but there are also rewards that you get for it, and so you don't get the rewards if you don't try. And so just continue. I think you said something to me in an email once, Jose, that you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and I'm not sure that 100% of zero is calculable, but I appreciate the sentiment. Like, you got to put yourself out there. You got to stay active and resilient. And I think my experience being self-employed gave me a lot of the resilience that I have today.
That's awesome. Well, I'm going to add a bonus question, a little one. We're in a conference, right? The AOM, the largest, biggest conference for management scholars. Any advice for for a conference, especially for PhD students, maybe that you give to your PhD students? What's a good advice when you're first timer, right, on a conference like this one or any other?
Well, this is kind of a hot take, because when I was a graduate student, I wanted to get to conferences as soon as I could. Not because I thought I was going to make a big difference or do all the networking. I also tend toward introversion. If you think of extroversion and introversion on a scale, there are times where I'm extroverted, but there are times where I just need to recharge after being around people on my own. And so the hot take part about this is just that I wanted to go to conferences early. My department chair thought it doesn't make sense for an early doctoral student to go to a conference because you would not get as much out of it. However, my retort to that now, going through it myself, and what I say to our faculty now when we're talking about doctoral students going to conferences, is that you get those early, funky, uncomfortable conferences out of the way, and each one becomes more comfortable. And so, of course, you're not going to make all the contacts that you need to have to develop a robust research pipeline, but you're going to meet people, and those people are probably going to be at that conference again. Depending on their trajectory on their research career. And so I want to go to as many conferences as I can. I want to meet as many people as I can, because the more conferences that I go to, the more comfortable I am in those social settings, and the easier it is to make those connections. And I'm not worried. I'm not stuck in my own head thinking about, oh gosh, I don't even know if this person wants to talk to me. Of course they want to talk to you. They haven't seen you in a year. And so I think getting those uncomfortable conferences out of the way for early doctoral students is important. And I know that there are people who disagree with me about that, but that's just been my experience, and it's the advice that I give to doctoral students too.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm 100% on board with that advice. I love that. So I think it's a great way to finish. Jeff, thanks again for taking the time. Michaela, thanks for joining me. And thanks everybody for sticking with us.
Thanks, guys.